In the previous video, we talked about the failure to develop a unified theory of reality in physics. We discussed how the goal of creating a unified theory seemed attainable for quite some time, but that goal has become unattainable for the last century due to developments in modern physics. These developments involved three main theories, namely quantum mechanics, general relativity, and thermodynamics, which are mutually contradictory. We discussed six such types of contradictions or dualisms that are impossible to reconcile in any logical framework. We discussed how these dualisms are the precise analogues of Gödel's incompleteness, in which each theory is by itself incomplete, but the attempt to unify them into a single theory leads to contradictions. Alongside discussing these problems in logic, mathematics, and physics, we have been discussing a semantic alternative and how it accepts all the observations of modern science and yet explains them in a different way, such that the contradictions that arise in modern science do not arise in the semantic science. The semantic science rests on treating everything as a concept or meaning rather than as an object. Concepts, as we have discussed repeatedly, can be treated in three ways as spaces, dimensions, and objects. Therefore, the concept does everything that an object does and yet goes beyond the limitations of objects. Since a concept makes a space, therefore spaces can be treated as classes of entities. Since a concept makes a dimension or a type, therefore time can be treated as a concept. Finally, since a concept can be treated as an object in a space and time, therefore ordinary objects can be modeled simply as concepts. Thereby, we don't need three categories called space, time, and object, because the same thing can be treated as a space, time, and object. But of course, we need to look at concepts in three different ways. When we try to look at the same thing in different ways, then the dualisms or contradictions found in modern science disappear, because the same thing is multiple mutually opposed things at once. Now, in this video, we will try to sketch an overarching picture of a semantic science. It was important to discuss the problems of modern science before we talk about an alternative, because we need to know why something is required before we talk about what that required thing is. The fundamental goal of an alternative science is that it must accommodate three basic types of phenomena into a single causal framework. I will call these phenomena deterministic, cataclysmic, and volitional. These words will become clear as we discuss each category of phenomena. By deterministic phenomena, we mean those things that always seem to happen without an observer's interference. For example, in our bodies, food is digested without our intervention. Similarly, there is blood circulation, breathing, and immunity. These work without our intervention and despite our ignorance of how they happen. By cataclysm, we mean those things that seem random occurrences, although they should not be random if we have to rationally explain why they happen and how they happen. A simple example of a random cataclysm is sickness. Sometimes our digestion stops working as well as it was working in the past. Since this doesn't happen always, therefore we think that indigestion is an aberration. We try to fix that aberration by diagnosis, medical treatment, exercise, and so on. Even as indigestion may happen occasionally, we don't suppose that it happens randomly or without any reason. We try to find the explanation and cause of that indigestion because it is necessary to fix it. As we try to find the cause of indigestion, we ultimately arrive at some trigger that caused it. It might be a specific type of food we might have eaten. It may be something else we did or did not do. These triggers don't occur always. Therefore, we cannot call them deterministic behaviors. And yet, because we can find a trigger, therefore, we can also not call it random. Something is neither random nor deterministic. So, what causes it? We generally abandon the quest for the cause by calling it serendipity. It was destiny, it had to happen, it just happened. Science has no answer to these types of questions, but they should be part of science. This is the second type of phenomena that science should be able to address. We cannot leave it at serendipity, destiny, or randomness. The third type of phenomena are volitional. For example, when we get indigestion, then we try to fix it. It may be a change in diet or the consumption of a medicine or exercising greater care in what we eat in the future. These are volitional changes. A medicine doesn't pop itself deterministically and automatically into our mouth every day. Factually, if we have indigestion, we have the choice to take a pill or just allow the digestive system to return to normalcy over time. By interfering in the working of the deterministic digestive system by our choices, we change that system. It was working in some way before, and it will work in a different way afterward. Generally, we try to take deviant behaviors back to deterministic behaviors by using choice. But choice could also be used to change the deterministic behavior from one type of determinism to another. Science has no explanation for how choices could interact with determinism. Choice versus determinism is a famous unsolved problem in science, and most people tend toward denial of choice because it causes so much damage to determinism that we would rather abandon choice than break science. But this rejection of choice is also contradictory to lots of other things that depend on choice. For example, if there was no choice, then why would there be rewards or punishments? The entire moral and social system rests on choice. If we take out choice, then the moral and social system would collapse. The social sciences uphold the virtues of choice, while natural sciences decry the role of choice. Since different people talk about natural and social sciences, therefore a dualism between determinism and choice is created. This dualism has never been solved. This is then the landscape of three classes of phenomena that science must integrate. Some are deterministic, some are seemingly random, occasional, or cataclysmic, and some are volitional. Yet another common pattern we observe in these phenomena is that the macroscopic behaviors are generally deterministic, while at the microscopic level, randomness and volition play a key role. A simple example of this determinism versus choice dichotomy is market dynamics. Suppose that I eat a lot of food every day. Since I get fat, therefore I decide to either reduce or change my diet. If I reduce my diet, then I will be buying less amounts of food. The demand for food will fall ever so slightly, which will then push the prices down in a demand and supply marketplace. The falling prices will then enable some hungry people to consume more food with the existing money. Thus, when I reduce my food consumption, then someone else is able to consume more food. The prices that might fall due to my reduced consumption rise again due to the increasing consumption of other people. This is called market stability. The market for food exists in a stable form, which means that there is a net overall supply and demand. Within that stability of supply and demand, there is considerable variability in an individual's consumption of food. If I reduce my food consumption, someone else's food consumption goes up and the market remains stable. Therefore, if you look at the macroscopic state of the market, it remains deterministic. But if we look at the microscopic state of each individual, then it is driven by their choices. The same pattern of macroscopic determinism and microscopic indeterminism can be observed at almost every level of reality. For example, macroscopically speaking, the planets move deterministically, but within each planet, the situation is quite variable. People in a society have a stable average age, which rises deterministically with peace and prosperity. But within that society, each individual may live for longer or shorter durations based on their life choices. Civilizations have been coming and going with near deterministic precision over the ages. But within that determinism, the precise causes of civilizational rise and fall tend to vary because different individuals tend to act in different ways within that civilizational cycle. Our bodies work deterministically from a macroscopic perspective in terms of our breathing, digestion, and immunity. But within the body, there is enormous variability in the day to day functioning of the different body parts. Even a large city exhibits deterministic behavior in terms of its water, electricity, transportation, etc. But within this determinism is enormous variation of individuals. The common pattern of determinism and indeterminism is that if we zoom out of a system and look at it from a distance, it seems deterministic. But if we zoom into that system, then we see enormous choice and variability. Therefore, determinism and choice are not necessarily contradictory phenomena. The contradiction is between macroscopic determinism and microscopic choices. The basic pattern of determinism and indeterminism is broken occasionally by seemingly random cataclysmic events such as earthquakes, wars, pandemics, floods, droughts, and so on. Before the cataclysmic event, there is one deterministic pattern at the macroscopic level. But after the cataclysmic event, there is another deterministic pattern at the macroscopic level. During the cataclysmic event, the determinism before and after the cataclysm is broken, and the variability in the choices also undergoes a dramatic upturn. Thus, we can talk about periods of stability followed by periods of upheaval, followed by periods of stability, followed by periods of upheaval. Some people have called this process punctuated equilibrium. Equilibrium is the normal thing, and punctuation in this equilibrium is the occasional thing. Within the equilibrium, there are enormous variations in choices. All the cataclysmic events are not the same. Some cataclysms are bigger than others. The bigger cataclysms are also less frequent. Therefore, we have to also layer the punctuated equilibrium process in a hierarchy, with the faster sequence of punctuated equilibrium itself being punctuated by a slower sequence of punctuated equilibria. We can call this the hierarchy of punctuated equilibrium processes. Finally, over long durations of time, we see cycles of change that don't precisely repeat themselves because these cycles are themselves nested within bigger cycles. This is not yet a scientific theory, it is just the observation of phenomena that we get from acquaintance with history. However, this acquaintance with history itself puts a different set of requirements on what a scientific theory must do, namely, that there must be a hierarchy of punctuated equilibria. In this hierarchy, we don't see contradictions between determinism, randomness, and volition. In this hierarchy, we don't think of time as something moving linearly forward. In this hierarchy, we don't try to reduce all phenomena to a single model of causation. Rather, we uphold two distinct criteria. First, we must integrate determinism, randomness, and volition. Second, we must organize them in a hierarchy of punctuated equilibria. This is what I mean by a semantic science that goes beyond the science that sees contradictions between determinism, randomness, and volition. It goes beyond the science that tries to reduce all phenomena to just one model. It also goes beyond a science that envisions linear progress. And it goes beyond a science that describes everything at a single layer of abstraction. Modern science has dramatically failed in its deterministic models. Every theory of modern science till date has been indeterministic. When determinism fails, science replaces it with probabilities and randomness. The failure of determinism is then substituted with a deterministic calculation of probabilities. Probabilities don't solve any problem because there is neither an accurate prediction of what will happen, nor is there an explanation of what has already happened. Modern science has failed because it started with the assumption that nature was deterministic. When that determinism failed, it replaced determinism with a deterministic calculation of probabilities. This is due to a great paucity of imagination. Reality is neither deterministic nor probabilistic. Reality is a hierarchy of punctuated equilibria. Our scientific models should be capable of accommodating such hierarchies of punctuated equilibria to be successful as a scientific endeavor. To understand the phenomena of punctuated equilibria, we have to ponder the fundamental question of scientific ontology. What is the world we see? Modern science has modeled this world based on the ideas taken from Greek philosophy, namely objectivity and universality. Objectivity means that the world is objects and their properties. Universality means that all the objects must have some invariable nature. Quite in contrast, in the semantic science, the world is possibility and contextuality. There is a reality that exists independent of all observers, but it is not objects, it is possibilities. Each observer can detect some of the possibilities while neglecting other possibilities. Thereby, subjectivity is not contrary to objectivity. Objectivity now simply means that there is a fixed set of possibilities. There are things that are impossible. But among the possible things, each observer can select some or the other possibilities in different contexts in some sequence. This is neither pure subjectivity nor pure objectivity. We have discussed the problems of pure realism and pure idealism earlier. Both pure realism and pure idealism are false. The truth is bidirectional under determination. That means the world limits the possibilities that we can legitimately apply to the world, but it doesn't fix the possibility to just one objectivity. Similarly, I can choose one of the many possibilities, but that selection is not pure subjectivity because that possibility is permitted by the world itself. The failure of scientific determinism is the result of modeling the world as objects and forcing universality on observers. It means the world is just one thing, and every observer has to see the world in just that one way. Saying that the world is many possibilities is contrary to objectivity. Saying that the world can be seen in many ways is contrary to universalism. Therefore, the failure of scientific determinism is also the failure of objectivity and universality. The world is many possibilities out of which we can choose one. We can describe this simple idea of possibility and choice through the graphic shown here. The observer is some possibilities A, B, and C. For example, A can be taste, B can be smell, and C can be color. Similarly, the world is some possibilities X, Y, and Z. X can be taste, Y can be smell, and Z can be color. Whatever we call the world can just be called food in this case, and the observer has the choice to see the color, smell the odor, and taste the flavor. Food doesn't compel us to see it, taste it, or smell it. We have the choice to see it, taste it, and smell it. Likewise, I don't compel food to be just one thing. Even if I just smell the food, another observer can also taste the food. If I am blind, then I cannot see the color. The absence of possibility of color in me doesn't mean that the food doesn't have color. It is also possible for another observer to see the color. Thus, worldly possibility doesn't fix my perception, and my perceptual possibility doesn't fix the world. This is the meaning of bidirectional underdetermination. Choice in this scheme is a specific type of relationship to the world. I can have a relation P to taste the food, a relation Q to smell the food, and a relation R to see the food. All my senses don't have to work always. When I choose to use a sense, then I have activated some possibility within me to see some possibility in the world. The result of my choice is that I get an outcome which we can call the perceived taste, smell, or color. This outcome is not an objective reality because someone might not see, or not smell, or not taste. The food is not forcing itself on the observer to have it smelled, tasted, and seen. The food has left the choice to the observer. Likewise, the observer cannot force the food to have or not have certain properties. The food doesn't assert itself on the observer, and the observer cannot assert itself on the food. This is also bidirectional underdetermination or bidirectional choice. From this simple example, we can derive an understanding of choice. Choice is not infinite. Choice doesn't mean free will to do whatever I want to do. Rather, choices are constrained by reality. This constraint can be described as the ability to choose two out of the three things. For example, I can choose to see an apple or an orange. The apple and orange are possibilities, and my relationship of seeing is a choice. When the possibility and relationship are fixed, then the outcome is also fixed. I cannot look at an apple and say that I don't see an orange. If I wanted to see an orange, then I should have chosen a different relationship to see. Similarly, I can choose an outcome of tasting an apple and the relationship of tasting the apple. Then only the taste possibility will be realized. I cannot say that I have chosen to taste an apple, but the smell possibility has not been activated. If I have chosen the relationship of taste, then my smell possibility will remain inactive. Finally, if I choose to activate my smell potential and expect to see the outcome of smelling the apple, then I have to establish the relationship to the apple. I cannot choose to activate smell and establish a relationship to the apple and then complain that I am not smelling the orange. In this way, choice is not unlimited. I cannot look at an apple to see an orange. I cannot keep my eyes closed and expect to see an apple, and I cannot wish to smell an apple and say that I will only be looking at an orange. Choice has a basic tripartite structure in which I can choose two out of the three, and the third is automatically fixed. Since I can only choose 2 out of 3, therefore the choice is not free will. It would be free will if I looked at an apple and saw an orange. It would be free will if I could see an apple without looking at it. It would be free will if I chose to look at an apple and the result was the smell of an apple rather than its color. Therefore, we should not confuse choice with free will. Free will has no constraint. Choices have constraints. Free will has no laws. Choices have laws. In this presentation, I will not be talking about free will further. I will always be talking about choice. One doesn't mean the other. There are many ways to describe the tripartite structure of choice, some of which are depicted here. We will go through them one by one. First, we can describe the tripartite structure of choice as 3 kinds of laws, namely natural law, moral law, and aesthetic law. In Greek philosophy, they were called truth, justice, and beauty. Aristotle called them logos, ethos, and pathos. Second, we can describe the tripartite structure of choice as 3 kinds of judgments. The judgment of logos is that of true or false, the judgment of ethos is that of right or wrong, and the judgment of pathos is that of good or bad. Third, we can describe the tripartite structure of choice as 3 kinds of possibilities that we can say could, should, and would. Finally, we can connect this tripartite structure to that just discussed previously, namely possibility, relationship, and outcome. An example will illustrate this tripartite structure easily. For example, suppose I want to eat an apple. This is a possibility if and only if apple is a real thing that can be eaten. If apples did not exist, then it would not be possible to eat them. If apples were not edible, then it would be impossible to eat them. Eating an inedible thing is like eating a stone. Then we can ask, why should I eat an apple? The answer is that an apple is nutritious, healthy, filling, and rejuvenating food to eat. The taste of the apple is refreshing, so eating it is an enjoyable activity. All this constitutes the goodness of the apple, or why I would want to eat an apple. If apples existed and were edible but were not healthy, nutritious, filling, and rejuvenating, or did not taste well, then although I could eat an apple, I would not be eating the apple. The edibility of the apple is an enabler of eating, but the goodness of the outcome is the reason that I would want to eat an apple. Finally, if for some reason I don't have the money to buy an apple, or there is an apple in front of me that belongs to someone else, then even though I could eat it and I would like to eat it, I should not eat it because the apple is someone else's property. What I should or should not do based on ownership is the moral law. The goodness of the apple is the aesthetic law, and the edibility of the apple, as opposed to the inedibility of a stone, is the natural law. A choice is simultaneously governed by these 3 laws. I could not choose something impossible. For me to choose, it has to be possible. Then I would not choose something that would be bad for me. For me to choose something, there should be some goodness in it for me. Finally, I should not choose something that is immoral, unrighteous, uncivil, or unethical. I must choose within bounds of morality and civility. Thus, choice must operate within confines of these 3 restrictions. I could choose what is possible, I would choose what is good for me, and I should choose what is morally righteous. All other choices are forbidden lawfully. Similarly, as we have discussed, within what I could, should, and would choose, I can only choose 2 out of 3. We can demarcate these two types of restrictions on choice by calling them lawful choice and rational choice. An irrational choice can be made, but it will not produce the expected outcome. For example, I can eat an apple and expect the taste of a mango. That is an irrational choice. Expecting the outcome of eating a mango by eating an apple is irrational. However, such a choice can be made lawfully if both apple and mango exist. They are both good for me, and I am morally entitled to eat either mango or apple. The truth, right, and good have permitted the choice, and yet the choice is irrational. On the other hand, an unlawful choice can be eating a stone, or eating poison, or eating a stolen apple. Eating a stone is violation of truth, eating poison is violation of good, and eating a stolen apple is violation of right. A rational choice always comes after passing the restrictions set by a lawful choice. That is, we should not eat stones, not eat poison, and not eat stolen apples. But we can eat apples and mangoes that we own. And yet we cannot eat an apple and expect it to taste like a mango. Once we understand the distinction between lawful and rational choice, then we can talk about how an unlawful choice is restricted. It is always restricted by reducing the domain of choices. For example, if I eat stone, then I will be sick and I won't be able to eat anything again. My choices of eating are thus restricted by eating stone. If I eat poison, then I might die and won't be able to eat anything again. Again, my choices of eating are restricted by eating poison. If I eat a stolen apple, then I might go to jail where I will have limited food choices. Again, my choices of eating are restricted by eating a stolen apple. Thus, all unlawful choices are punished by further limiting the choice. Similarly, if I make lawful choices, then my choices can be increased. For example, if I eat the apples, then due to the good health I get, I might sometimes indulge in not so healthy food choices. If I don't eat stones, then too I can eat less healthy foods. Finally, if I don't eat stolen apples, then too I can continue eating apples, and by that I can indulge in some not so healthy food choices. Basically, lawful choices expand and unlawful choices contract. How much they expand or contract and in which areas they expand or contract is a detailed issue that I will not try to discuss here. But we all agree on the principle of expansion of choice by lawful choices and a contraction of choice by unlawful choices. This is common everywhere. Once we understand how choices become causes, then we have to talk about an alternative type of causation that is rooted in choice rather than in physical forces. Causality in modern science is free of all judgments of truth, right, and good. We cannot say if the cause or the effect is true, right, or good. We can at most say that it exists or doesn't exist. The statement that claims existence for a non existent cause can be falsified. The statement is spoken by a person. He made the false claim. His claims can be falsified. But causality never makes a false claim. Hence, there is a fundamental difference between scientific causality, which can never make a false claim, versus a person who can make a false claim. For example, a person can make a false claim on TV. The TV is not falsified when the person is falsified. This is because the TV had no choice in making the claim. The TV was just passing signals from the speaker to the viewer. The speaker, however, had a choice. Thereby, everything about the TV is just a fact, not truth, right, and good. The speech of a person is also a fact, but that fact could be judged as truth, right, and good. When we treat choice as a cause, we allow for the judgment of choices. The facts of modern science cannot be judged, but the choices of a person can be true, right, and good. Based on these judgments, we can stack rank these choices from best to worst. The best choice is that which benefits the most number of observers in the best manner possible and for the longest possible time. The worst choice is that which hurts the most observers in the worst possible manner for the longest time. We can use it to stack rank choices. A judgment is not an impersonal process. Some judge has to use the best criteria for judgment to stack rank the choices. That is, judgment should be to benefit the most observers in the best way possible for the longest period of time. The judge that stack ranks choices cannot be non-ideal because then the stack ranking of choices would also be non-ideal. Naturally, this introduces a role for a universal and supreme observer. The symptom of the best choice is that those making good choices are rewarded proportionate to the goodness of their choice. Similarly, those making bad choices are punished proportionate to the badness of their choices. If the choices of the universal observer are not the best choices, then good choices may be punished and bad choices may be rewarded. At least, the rewards and punishments will not be proportionate to the good or bad deeds of those making such choices. Thus, if the universal observer is not ideal, then the universe will be unjust and immoral. Most people think that if we use choice, then we can never get determinism. This is false. If we always make the best choice, then the result will be deterministic because of all the other alternatives that could have been chosen are not chosen. When we know that someone will do the best thing, then we can predict what they will do. We can always find the perfect thing in any given situation, and we know that it will be chosen. Therefore, always making the best choice entails accurate prediction, which is determinism. Determinism is contrary to choice if we don't know how choices are being made. In that case, we think that choices could be anything and thus they will be random. That is not the case with the person who makes the best choices. Therefore, determinism is inconsistent with random choice, but it is perfectly consistent with the best choice. The rationality underlying the best choice makes choices deterministic. It is not mathematical determinism, but it is determinism nevertheless. Rewards and punishments are the cataclysmic behaviors. They occur occasionally when rewarding and punishing agents are brought into a relationship of mutual interaction. For example, a child is born to good or bad parents with a healthy or unhealthy body. When he grows up, he gets good or bad friends. When he further grows up, he gets good or bad jobs. When he further grows up, he gets good or bad spouse, then good or bad children, and so on. When this relationship is created, good or bad events keep happening with passing time. This is because each individual is some possibilities, and time triggers different relationships to bring forth different outcomes. An individual cannot change their own nature, cannot give up the relationship, and hence the outcomes cannot be changed. We noted that two out of the three, namely possibility, relation, and outcome, could be chosen. But if possibility and relationship are fixed, then the outcome is also fixed. Most people think that determinism, cataclysm, and choice are contradictory concepts because they have modeled the world as objects with fixed properties. However, if the world was modeled as potentialities rather than fixed properties, then each actuality resulting from a potentiality will be the result of the activation of some potential by a choice. Then each cataclysm will be the consequences of choice. This consequence is a new possibility, different from the outcome of activating a possibility. Therefore, in a world of objects, there are causes and effects. But in a world of potentials and choices, there are relations, outcomes, and consequences. First, a possibility is chosen. Second, a relationship to that possibility is established. Third, through interaction with that possibility, there is an outcome. And fourth, as the result of making the choice, there is a consequence. The person who makes the best choices creates determinism. Everyone else creates choices with good or bad cataclysms. Thus, choices, cataclysms, and determinism are the outcomes of the same process of choosing a possibility. The contradiction between them exists only in a worldview of objects and properties. No such contradiction exists in the worldview of possibilities and choices. The determinism of best choice creates a cyclical behavior in which good choices lead to good times lead to bad choices lead to bad times, and bad times lead to good choices. This is a cyclical determinism produced as a result of judging choices. All these judgments are best choices. The best choice doesn't mean one choice. Rewarding a good choice is one type of best choice. Punishing a bad choice is another type of best choice. Responding to situations appropriately and proportionately is the definition of best choice. That definition applies to rewards and punishments that are appropriate and proportionate. Therefore, we can describe the world as two tiers of reality, one as the event tier and two as the trajectory tier. When there are too many bad choices, then bad times are created. Not everyone suffers even in bad times. Those who suffer are those who have made bad choices. Similarly, not everyone enjoys during good times. Those who enjoy are those who have made good choices. Therefore, good and bad times are just events. Good and bad lives are trajectories over these events. Fixing the events doesn't fix the trajectories. This is why, even during bad times, some people have a good life, and some people have a bad life even during good times. Those are the exceptions. The time defines the overall trend. The determinism of best choices is quite different from the determinism in modern science. Determinism in modern science is the effect of determinism in logic. Given a premise, the conclusion is fixed. That kind of determinism has already failed, as we have noted. Given a premise, the conclusion is not fixed because the premise is a set of possibilities of many alternatives. Everything can be understood in many ways. Everything can be used in many ways. Those are the choices. Since choice is applied to a premise, therefore the conclusion is not fixed. However, because choice is judged as truthful, righteous, or good, therefore choice is not free either. Every choice brings a responsibility. The future premises depend on the choices being applied to the current premises. The world that we will see in the future is determined by how we have interpreted and used the world around us previously. Choice makes logic underdetermined. It simply means that given a premise, we can choose our conclusion. But the consequence of that choice will be a new premise that will constrain our choices if we make bad choices. The consequence of choice will be a new premise that will expand our choices if we make good choices. The absence of determinism in logic doesn't mean the absence of logic. It means that there is an alternative logic in which the choice to interpret and use reality is judged to change the reality in the future. The process of underdetermination appears in the six questions of causality, namely what, when, where, how, why, and who. A complete explanation requires answers to these six questions. An answer to one question doesn't fully determine the answer to the other five questions. For example, we can show you a knife. It might fix what the world is, but it doesn't fix how it should be used. It doesn't fix who should use it. It doesn't fix when and where it should or should not be used. And it doesn't fix why that knife should or should not be used. Just giving the answer to what a thing is doesn't fix the answer to the other five questions. This is underdetermination. Answers to six questions are neither fully decided by one answer nor are they totally independent of that one answer. How something can be used, where and when it should be used, by whom it should be used, and why it should be used in a certain way are underdetermined by what it is. Modern scientific determinism arose by reducing the answers to six questions to the answer to just one question. In Newtonian mechanics, for example, if you just know the state of the world at one moment, then you know the state of the world for all time to come. The answer to what the world is fully determines the answer to how, why, where, when, and who. This is, of course, not reality. This is just a caricature of reality created by Newton. This is why Newton's mechanics fails even to explain the outcome of a car collision, let alone the sophisticated phenomena of living bodies. But when the caricature of reality fails to explain reality, then those accustomed to the caricature blame reality rather than their caricature. They don't say that their model is flawed, they say that reality is random. This is because they never gave serious thought to the fact that any causal explanation involves six questions. Determinism tried to reduce it to just one answer. We can illustrate this underdetermination by an example of a war. What happened? It was a war. When it happened, we can give a date. Throughout history, wars have been happening. Just because a war happened doesn't fix that it happened at a certain time. When the war happened is neither totally independent of the fact that it was a war, nor is it fully fixed by the fact that it was a war. Then we can ask where it happened. Wars have been happening in many places. Sometimes multiple wars are going on simultaneously. Therefore, saying that a war happened at one time doesn't fix the place at which the war happened. Then we can ask, how did it happen? We can say that some tanks, missiles, submarines, and airplanes were used. Since tanks and missiles did not exist 200 years ago, therefore time decides part of the answer of how the war happened. Since all countries may not have submarines and airplanes, therefore the place partially decides it. But since many countries have both tanks and airplanes, therefore fixing the time and place of war doesn't fix how the war was fought. It could be fought with battle tanks or with airplanes. Then we can ask, why did the war happen? There could be economic, religious, or political motives. The war could happen for any of these reasons. But all the reasons are not always equally important. For example, a religious war could not happen before the religion came into existence. Similarly, we can ask who was involved. The same war could be fought at the same time, same places, with the same weapons for the same reasons, but with different soldiers. A soldier could not participate in a war before his birth. and a soldier could fight in different wars. Therefore, the soldier underdetermines the war in which he fights, and a war underdetermines which soldiers fight in the war. In this way, each of the 6 questions underdetermines the answer to the other 5. We can also group these 6 questions into a triplet called prediction and a triplet called explanation. What happens, when it happens, and where it happens is the prediction. But how it happens, why it happens, and to whom it happens is the explanation. These two triplets also determine each other. Given some prediction, it could be explained in a different way. Given an explanation, it could be used to predict something else. Therefore, knowing the prediction doesn't fix the explanation, and knowing the explanation doesn't fix the prediction. For example, classical mechanics is one type of explanation different from quantum mechanics. Both classical mechanics and quantum mechanics can be used to make some of the same predictions. Similarly, classical and quantum mechanics will make some different predictions. Thus, we cannot fix an explanation for all types of predictions, and we cannot fix the predictions for a given type of explanation. This is the underdetermination of prediction and explanation. A prediction doesn't fully determine an explanation, and an explanation doesn't fully determine the prediction. The underdetermination of prediction and explanation can be easily illustrated by the analogy of a drama. In a drama that follows the script given in a play, the events are predetermined by the script. But the explanation is not predetermined because the enactment of the play required some producers, directors, and actors. The audience of the play can make the prediction that something will happen because they have earlier read the play. But the producers, directors, and actors supply the explanation of the play by their actions. For example, in a Shakespearean drama, we know in advance that some characters will die or will kill others. People know the outcomes in advance if they have read the play. That is prediction. But they still go and watch the play to see it being enacted. The acting of the actors is the explanation of the drama. Modern science rests on the notion of universal laws. They are supposed to be never violated, but they are frequently violated. Nobody has been able to formulate a universal law till date. This is why we need an alternative idea of order instead of laws. Order is not contrary to disorder. Order and disorder can exist simultaneously, although we want to create order and we are forced to suffer disorder. The existence of order is not a universal law, it is simply a desirable condition. Modern thinking is gripped by the ideas of laws. Laws originated in Judaism as contracts between man and God, in which God would do something for man if man did something for God. No inquiries about fundamental principles were involved in this contract. Supposedly, each party wanted something from the other party, so their capacity to provide, demand, and negotiate was axiomatic. The concept of law was then extended to nature. The process of contract negotiation was replaced by experimentation. An experiment has an input and an output. You give something to nature, and nature gives something back to you. What input produces what output, therefore, became a law. Mathematics served as the model of nature because a mathematical function has an input and an output. Arbitrary mathematical functions now became laws. The concept of law was then extended to society as contracts of give and take. Marriage, employment, citizenship, and government all became negotiated contracts. Each contract comes with the provision of being able to renegotiate the contract. Thus, everything comes down to renegotiating and negotiating convenient contracts. Social laws are contracts between humans. Scientific laws are contracts between humans and nature. Religious laws are contracts between humans and God. The fact is that there are no laws. 2,500 years of Western thinking about religious, scientific, and social laws is just imaginary nonsense. The proof that it is nonsense is indeterminism, which pervades all areas of modern science, where the most testable laws have been formulated. The laws don't work as they are expected to. If you insist, we can sometimes replace them with probabilities. At other times, we just get sheer randomness. The situation is slightly better in case of social laws because we have a well-defined mathematical equation about the probability whether the law will be applied to someone or not. That mathematical equation says the greater the wealth and power at play, the lower the probability that laws apply. Since most people are poor and powerless, therefore, social laws apply to them with a very high probability. Anyone with a shred of intelligence will stop worrying about the imaginary laws. They don't exist. They have just been imagined to exist. People have believed in imaginary laws to varying degrees of blind faith. The debate between science and religion, for example, is not between reason and blind faith. It is between two different sets of imaginary laws. Both are equally blind faith. Hence, the debate between them can never be settled. Therefore, I will set aside the question of imaginary laws and talk about natural order. Natural order can be justified based on self evident principles. For example, the pursuit of truth is a self evident principle. We don't need to justify why we should pursue the truth. That pursuit is self justified. Similarly, the pursuit of justice is self justified. We don't have to justify justice, it is self justified. Finally, the pursuit of happiness is self justified. We don't have to justify why we should pursue happiness. That pursuit is also self justified. Thus, the self evident principles are the pursuit of truth, justice, and happiness. As a corollary, the existence of falsehood, injustice, and unhappiness is also axiomatic because without it, the pursuit of truth, justice, and happiness won't exist. Thus, what we mean by order is the prevalence of truth, justice, and happiness. And what we mean by disorder is the presence of falsehoods, injustice, and unhappiness. Since order and disorder both exist, therefore there cannot be a law that states only order must exist. Anybody who insists that disorder cannot exist because of some law has to just observe the worldly presence of injustice, untruth, and unhappiness. Some people might say that the pursuit of truth, justice, and happiness is not self evident. The best way to convince them of the self evident status of truth, justice, and happiness is to subject them to lies, injustice, and unhappiness. Surely then they will find truth, justice, and happiness desirable. Since every person will find truth, justice, and happiness desirable, and lies, injustice, and unhappiness undesirable, therefore, we can convince everyone about the self evident nature of truth, justice, and happiness. The question is simple: why does disorder, namely falsehood, injustice, and unhappiness, exist? The answer is also simple. If we create falsehood, injustice, and unhappiness, then we must be subjected to the same type of falsehood, injustice, and unhappiness to make us realize that the pursuit of truth, justice, and happiness is the natural, self evident principle. The contradiction of lawful is unlawful, but it is the norm rather than the exception. The unlawful refutes the lawful. The contradiction of order is disorder. Disorder is not necessarily the norm, although it could sometimes be the norm rather than the exception. However, disorder reestablishes order. Therefore, disorder is not unwelcome. When people are subjected to disorder based on the type of disorder they have created previously, they begin to realize the importance of order. Subjecting people to disorder is therefore education. It serves a useful purpose to bring back order. But unlawful serves no such purpose. If someone thinks that order is something other than the actual order, namely truth, justice, and happiness, then we can subject them to untruth, injustice, and unhappiness, and they will come back to their senses. Those who profess a type of order different from true order can be subjected to their chosen definition of order, and they can be corrected by meeting their definition face to face. Hence, disorder is education about true order, and true order is the practice of the true order. Both yield the same result. Once the concepts of order and disorder are understood in contrast to the concepts of lawful and unlawful, then everything becomes very easy. Disorder is now not a bad thing because it educates us about order. Order is still the best thing, but disorder is not to be rejected. The universe now produces disorder to educate us about order. It also produces order to show us the virtues of order. There are times when greater order or disorder will be created. Disorder seems like breaking the laws, but it is still educating us about order. The construction of order and disorder can be understood by the analogy of the drama we discussed earlier. A drama has three components, namely characters, actors, and events. Every story begins with characters. Famous fables often begin by saying, "Once upon a time there was some king, queen, teacher, student, rich man, poor man," and so on. Then we name those characters. Finally, we talk about their activities. The same characters could be different actors, the same actors could behave differently. The story is constructed by combining characters, actors, and events. The universe can be treated as just that story. It has characters, actors, and events. The story is entertaining. The story has a moral because it teaches us lessons about right and wrong. Finally, through the right and wrong, it takes us towards the truth. When something is truthful, moral, and entertaining, then it has satisfied the three conditions of order, namely truth, right, and good. Even if we can see disorder in the world, namely deceit, injustice, and unhappiness, there is a deeper cause behind it, namely that it is educating those with false ideas of order. The disorder we see is not entirely bad. It is, in fact, the best kind of order for those who have misconceived order. This three-tiered story construction technique reconciles the three kind of phenomena we talked about earlier. The universe is deterministic in the events. We can predict what will happen in the future accurately. We can precisely tell the traits of various times to come or the types of things that will happen in the future. However, as we have discussed earlier, these events can be joined together by different trajectories. Each trajectory is a different character and actor. By the assignment of actors to characters, the actors experience cataclysmic events without contradicting the determinism of the story. Since actors can choose to play a character, therefore volition is reconciled with event determinism. This reconciliation depends on the underdetermination of the six questions. What happens does not determine how it happens or who does it. To illustrate by an example, we can say that a war will happen at a certain time. The outcomes of that war are fixed in advance. The armies fighting the war can organize themselves into different ranks and platoons. Different individuals can choose to participate or avoid the said war. But none of these changes will alter the outcome of the war. The war is predestined and the outcome of the war is predetermined. But we can connect the beginning and end states of the war through many different trajectories. Those trajectories involve different characters and actors that cannot change the outcome. Whenever someone tries to change the outcome, his efforts would be nullified by the actions of yet another character and actor introduced serendipitously. However, everyone bears the outcomes of their actions and not the outcomes of others' actions. Each individual is responsible only for their actions and not the actions of the whole universe. This tripartite system of reality reconciles three kinds of separations in Western thinking, formulated as natural law, moral law, and aesthetic law. The aesthetic law is individual happiness. The moral law is contextual duty. The natural law is universal events. Three kinds of laws combine to produce an experience. If they are separated, then they cannot explain experience, which means that anyone who tries to formulate a natural law to predict events will always produce indeterminism. There will never be a natural explanation of experience that tries to separate moral law and aesthetic law from the natural law. This has been proven over and over in science. The failure of science, however, doesn't stop people from repeating the mistakes of the past because the separation of logos, ethos, and pathos is an Aristotelian dogma, and for 2500 years, nothing has been done to change that dogma. Nobody has questioned this separation, hence, they are not about to question it now. The dogma remains impervious to reason and repeated failure because the unity of logos, ethos, and pathos is beyond people's wildest imaginations. Such unity, however, has always been envisioned in Vedic thinking, where the soul has three aspects of truth, right, and good. And because everything is produced with the soul as the basis, therefore everything can be understood only by the unity of the three aspects. The dogmas of separation and depersonalization are unique to Western thinking, not common in other places, and certainly not in the Vedic system. This also means that all the failures of Western thinking can only be resolved by reversing the separation and depersonalization. These three kinds of laws are merged into a single inverted tree that describes a hierarchical system of control that constitutes different characters, actors, and events. The trunks, branches, twigs, and leaves of the tree are the characters. At each trunk, branch, twig, or leaf, there is an actor, and the interaction between these actors is the events. Three kinds of realities are combined to produce one phenomenal world. Thereby, the description of reality as an inverted tree is not different from that of the description of three realities and one phenomena. It is also not different from three kinds of laws and one phenomena, or of three kinds of spaces and times and one phenomena. They are just different ways of describing the same reality that illuminate different aspects of the same reality. At the root of the Aristotelian separation of logos, ethos, and pathos is the separation of private and public, subjective and objective, mind and body. In short, all the problems begin with dualisms. As we go on adding dualisms, we go on separating the laws of the various sides of the dualism. In this case, the moral law and the aesthetic law become private, subjective, and mental, while the natural law becomes public, objective, and bodily. Then the students of morality try to reduce morality to bodily behavior, but still the moral law doesn't become natural law. Then the students of aesthetics try to reduce happiness to the body, but still the aesthetic law doesn't become natural law. We just get separation after separation by first creating a dualism, then trying to reduce the dualism to materialism without ever solving the problem of the dualisms. In earlier videos, we have talked about how present science and semantic science both study trajectories. The difference was in the study of object trajectories versus life trajectories. But that is not the only difference. There is an even more fundamental difference in terms of the principle used to construct these trajectories. The science of object trajectory uses a principle called the principle of least action. The science of life trajectory uses a principle called the principle of best action. We will discuss these two principles now because it brings out the contrast in two sciences and helps us see which one is better. The most fundamental principle in modern science is called the least action principle. Action is whatever takes a body from one state to another. Given two states called the initial and the final states, the law of nature is obtained by minimizing the total action required to go from the initial to the final state. We can think of action loosely as the effort spent in change. The least action principle says that bodies will follow the path of least effort in any change. The definition of effort is not the same for every body. The action is defined differently in Newtonian mechanics and Maxwellian electrodynamics. But every scientific theory can be converted to a least action principle by postulating some action. Of course, as we have discussed, all these theories can never be reconciled into a single unified theory because each theory makes contradictory assumptions about what the action is. Still, science thinks of change in terms of least action. The most fundamental principle in semantic science is that the goal is fixed, but the paths toward the goal are not fixed. Ideally, one can follow the shortest path to a goal, but non-ideally speaking, one can also follow the non-shortest path toward a goal. I can walk from my bedroom to my kitchen directly, or I can walk out of my bedroom, get out of the house, sit in a car and drive to an airport, board to a flight to another city or planet, and then reverse course to come back to the house and then walk to the kitchen. Laws of nature allow both possibilities. A shortest path is not mandated by nature. Hence, the principle of least action is a desirable goal, but it is not the only truth. Hence, all theories of science based on least action principles are falsified. The principle in semantic science is that the goal for everyone is fixed. It is the perfect truth, right, and good. Anyone who has a different goal in mind can be subjected to the problems of that alternative goal, and they will then change their mind. Subjecting them to their worldview, having them recognize its problems, and ensuring a correction occurs can be a long process. During that process, a person may seem to move closer to the goal or farther from the goal. He may see greater order and then disorder. He may compare the order to the disorder and then decide to choose one of them. But however long the process may be, it always drives toward the perfect truth, right, and good. Hence, we don't call it the principle of least action. We rather call it the principle of best action. The action is effort being spent to reach the perfect truth, right, and good. It is not necessarily the shortest path to destination, but even a long-winded path can take us to the destination, quite like I can walk from the bedroom to the kitchen directly or via another city or planet. The least action principle tries to minimize the effort, while the best action principle tries to maximize the goodness of effort. Less effort is not welcome if it takes us permanently away from perfection. More effort is not unwelcome if it takes us closer towards perfection while following a non shortest path. The least action principle universalizes the law of motion, while the best action principle universalizes the goal of motion. In modern science, there are infinite unique goals, and there is a common law to get to those infinite goals. In semantic science, there is a common goal, but there are infinite paths to that goal. In modern science, by following the shortest path, we will always get to the goal. This is factually false on two counts. First, we don't necessarily follow the shortest path. Second, we don't always reach our goal. Therefore, the principle of least action is easily falsified. We could take that to mean that there is no law of nature, that nature is random, indeterministic, or lawless. But there is a better alternative in which both the failures of least action principle can be understood. We don't necessarily follow the shortest path to the perfect destination because we don't know what the destination is. Similarly, we don't always reach the intended destination because frustration in the non ideal pursuits is the method by which we learn what the goal should be. Thus, the best action principle explains why the least action principle must fail and offers an alternative of the shortest path to the most perfect conclusion. The best action principle involves a non binary logical thinking in which every path is accepted as a path toward the ultimate goal. But every path is not equalized to all the other paths because other paths are not necessarily the shortest. I can say that flying from my home to another city is still a valid path to my kitchen if I eventually turn around and come back to the kitchen. And yet, we don't equate the indirect paths to the direct paths. Thus, there is a broad minded acceptance of all paths as longer or shorter paths toward the same destination without equating the shortest path to the non shortest paths. The best action principle is broad minded, egalitarian, and accommodative. The least action principle is judgmental, exclusionary, and prescriptive. When both principles can be accepted, then a stark dichotomy is dissolved. By broad minded acceptance, society is given freedom to choose their path. By the prescriptive judgment, society is given the shortest path. The prescription of the shortest path is neither exclusionary of non short paths, nor is it the mindless inclusion of all paths. Therefore, those who understand the principle of best action do not see a contradiction between the principle of least action and that of the best action. Based on the principle of best action, the Vedic texts provide the definition of dharma, sanatan dharma, and kaitav dharma. Dharma is anything that is taking us closer toward the goal, although not on the shortest path. For example, I can walk from my bedroom to the kitchen, but stop for a moment to recline on a couch. I have deviated slightly from the shortest path, but it can be called dharma because we are moving toward the destination. Sanatan Dharma, on the other hand, takes the shortest and the most direct path to the destination. Finally, Kaitav Dharma teaches a person to go to another city far from the kitchen, after reaching which the person realizes that he has gone farther from the goal and is compelled to retrace his steps. The Vedic system talks about the best path and many non best paths, although all these paths take a person closer to the perfect truth, right, and good. These paths are also organized in a ladder such that one path leads to another path as the various rungs of the ladder. The Vedic system acknowledges the possibility of paths that it hasn't prescribed as possible paths, based on different times, places, situations, and persons. The only criteria for a path is that it must take a person closer to the perfect truth, right, and good. Thereby, the Vedic system also criticizes other paths that take a person farther from the perfect truth, right, and good. This criticism is not the exclusivism of other paths that claim to be the sole path. It is rooted in a rational discussion about which path is taking a person closer to the destination or farther from the destination. Still, if someone insists on going away from the destination or following the non shortest path to the destination, the Vedic system doesn't coerce them. It gives them a choice to follow the path of their own choosing because it knows that all paths ultimately lead to the same destination, and the person following the non shortest path will eventually have to retrace his steps in the future. All intelligent people are invited to study the perfect truth, right, and good, and the shortest or non shortest paths to the destination. Since all the discussion is rational and rooted in the best action principle, therefore there is no room for blind faith or irrational conclusions. Still, the people who divide scientific law, religious law, and social law, or those who imagine to have the power to change everything at whim, are allowed to waste their time.